Well, in the past, Russia and the United States, and before that, the Soviet Union and the United States, have had fairly similar impulses on a variety of issues. The key issue for both of them, certainly when they come to dealing with other states, for example, at the non-proliferation treaty review conferences, has been their own systems. And this will be an issue at the upcoming review conference as well. It's an area where they are both likely to receive criticism from non-nuclear states who've gotten a bit frustrated at what they see as the lack of sufficient progress in meeting the obligations that the NPT implies for further reductions. So one important factor will simply be the status of their talks and negotiations for a follow-on to the New START Treaty. Showing that they're making progress will be an important factor in the way they deal with the NPT treaty. Beyond that, there are several non-proliferation related issues which will be important for the relationship. From the US point of view, the main one is China, in part because of the increasingly difficult relationship, the increasing concerns in the United States security policy community about Chinese policies, including in particular about longer term prospects for their nuclear posture. At the moment, the most recent Defense Department estimates of the Chinese force levels are on the order of 200, low 200 warheads. But it's widely believed that they're going to double that number over time. This will be something that Washington will be focusing very much on. They're going to try to engage China in the arms control process, at least informally, to try to get more transparency and predictability about this. And how, from the U.S. point of view, whether Russia supports this or not, to what extent they do, will be a factor in the relationship. So I think when we go beyond the bilateral Russian-American relationship, the big issue in the U.S. case will be China. Well, it's a very interesting question. First of all, I'm very glad that New START was extended. President Biden made it clear during the campaign that he was going to do this if he were elected. He has done so with Mr. Putin. And so the big question is what comes next? And then it gets, at this point, it gets much more difficult because in many ways, the strategic world is changing. There are, in addition to other nuclear powers, including China, which for the US is becoming a bigger issue. There are new technologies and new systems, some of which have not been accounted for. And other aspects of the arms control world, or the arms control agreements, have evaporated. And the big issue here, of course, is non-strategic systems. There are big differences between the US and Russian priorities. In the US case, there's an increasing push and interest for a really comprehensive, ambitious follow-on to New START. That is a treaty which covers all nuclear weapons, both deployed and non-deployed, of all ranges, not just strategic, but also sub-strategic systems. This would be extremely difficult, and even if there were agreement in principle from the Russian side to do it, there would be a lot of new issues, including verification, for example, issues that would have to be addressed in ways that they haven't had to be dealt with before. What we're hearing are two big concerns that they want to account for, and those are missile defense on the one hand, and conventional strategic systems, long-range precision conventional systems. Again, one can imagine agreements in both of those areas, but they're going to be difficult, and they're going to be linked to as a negotiating matter to these systems that the U.S., these priorities that the U.S. is going to raise. So one of the big questions, again, I would like to see a much more ambitious set of agreements over time. But one thing that's not clear is how the various parts of them should be linked. Some people that I've seen both in the US and occasionally elsewhere have called for one big ambitious agreement that covers everything at once. I think personally that would be a mistake. Even if it could be done over time, it would take a great deal of time, be very complicated. As I mentioned before, it's going to be important for the US and Russia to demonstrate progress early, including at the Non-Proliferation Treaty Review Conference. And so I think the much more sensible course is to try to get an agreement early and quickly on the strategic systems, and keep talking, engage early, and keep talking and try to get some follow-on agreements to deal with these other issues, sub-strategic systems, conventional systems, and the like. Well, my own view, and this I may be in the minority here, I don't think the increase in numbers is what's so dramatic here. It's the numbers are less than they used to have some time ago. But the direction and what's important for everyone to understand is the rationale. The British have released several documents explaining the reasons for this, and they basically have been two. One is what they have described as an increasingly contentious, difficult, and worrisome security environment, pointing in particular to both to Russia and China. And the other is new technologies. The numbers, again, the 260, there's not a huge difference. But what's striking is the fact that before this announcement, which surprised many people, including me, the previously announced plans of Britain were to reduce further. So again, what has been striking is not so much the difference, to me, is not so much the difference in numbers, but the change in direction. That's one. The other is what may come with it. The British have said, for example, that they're going to be less open about their statements about the nature of their forces and the composition and disposition of those forces. They've embraced what's been called strategic ambiguity. That's not unusual. Many other countries do that too, but it is a change. And the important thing to me is why it's being done. Again, it reflects a growing concern about the stability of the international environment, the stability of the nuclear environment, particular concerns, as they've indicated, about where Russia is going, and about new technologies. And those are the aspects of this that I think that need to be addressed. It's not so much the numbers, it's what's behind the numbers. Well, let me address the second part of the question first, because the answer to that is clear. The five main nuclear armed states that recognized as such in the United Nations have already said they do not support the treaty, and that they don't think it's the wise way to proceed. I don't think that's going to change, at least not anytime soon. And although I'd love to be proven wrong about this, I think it is very unlikely. I don't see the prospects in the foreseeable future for the elimination of nuclear weapons in general. Again, I'd like to be proven wrong, but the state of the international security environment is such that at the moment, if anything, the pressures are moving in the opposite direction. Not so much always for numbers, although there are these concerns in the US about the Chinese levels. But both Russia, China, and the US are all modernizing their systems. I don't see signs that they're going to reduce dramatically. I do hope that a quick follow-on bilateral U.S.-Russian treaty can start reducing nuclear weapons, strategic nuclear weapons further. But this is going to be at best a step-by-step process. And to really make dramatic changes in nuclear force levels is going to require addressing what has become, unfortunately, the most contentious Russian-American relationship that I can recall in decades. Well, again, I mean, I think if we're looking at the bilateral relationship, we're talking about a nuclear war between Russia and the West, for example. The main thing is to prevent war in general. I don't think either side is looking for opportunities to use nuclear weapons. They know how incredibly dangerous that would be, how it would be a catastrophe, and I think that's widely recognized. So there are a couple of things. First of all, just as a matter of politics, I'd like to see both of them reconfirm, reiterate the statements that we saw emanating from Mr. Gorbachev and Mr. Reagan, namely that nuclear wars cannot be won and should never be fought. This would, I think, be reassuring to people. But the more important behind that is to prevent wars in general. As I say, if we're ever to be a nuclear exchange, I think it would come out of a failed and escalated conventional conflict. And so therefore, to prevent nuclear war, what we need to do is deal with the issues that could cause military conflict in general, particularly at the borders between Russia and NATO. It's one of the reasons that, from a Western point of view, there's been such concern about Russian exercises around the border, including most recently, and I'm sure that's reciprocated from Russia about what they see closer to their borders. And we're going to need to address these. These are going to be very difficult because both countries believe they have important requirements there. So we're going to need, in the absence of a dramatic conventional arms control, we're going to have much more important and regular discussions about strategic stability. Those discussions are going to have to address both, I think, over time, both nuclear issues, but also conventional force deployments, exercises, and routines. So as I say, the underlying point to prevent nuclear war is to prevent conflict in general.